Dr. Xerri is a professor at the University of Malta. He's a famous researcher in ELT and working these days, I guess, and that's what the event will be today, is about 21st century skills. And without further ado, Dr. Xerri, shall we have you begin?
Thank you so much, Jose, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're all enjoying this conference. I would like to start by thanking KOTESOL for inviting me to do this talk, especially Rhea, who has been coordinating my participation in this event. As Jose mentioned, yes, I am based in Malta, a tiny island in the Mediterranean Sea. And for the past few years, my primary interest has been the development of certain global skills, certain 21st century skills in English language teaching, primarily critical thinking and creativity. Last year, together with another speaker at this event, Sofia Mavridi, I co-edited a book on the development of 21st century skills in English language teaching. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk a bit about that later today at the panel that is taking place in 2 hours' time. My session this afternoon will focus on competencies that in my reading and research over the past few years, I feel are particularly vital for students in the 21st century. And I'm describing them as future-proof because in a way, if we give attention to the development of these competencies, then we are highly likely to enable our learners to face the uncertainty of the future in a more effective manner. These are competencies that are valued by industry, valued by corporations all over the world. They are also sometimes mentioned in policy documents, educational policy documents, but there is sometimes a bit of vagueness and ambiguity as how they could be implemented in everyday teaching practice. And the book that I've just referred to tries to actually make all of that a bit clearer, tries to provide teachers with a bit of clarity as to how they can position themselves, not only as teachers of a language, which we all are, but teachers of additional skills, global skills that are vital for our learners once they join society as employees, but also in their everyday life. So these skills are not just important for employment, as you can see on the slide, but they are also important for success in a variety of different personal domains. I should start perhaps by indicating what the different terms that exist. I've been using, for example, 21st century skills, global skills, competencies. And yes, what we're doing here is using the term competencies as a catch-all term in a way. We're referring to non-technical skills. We're referring to transferable skills, employability skills, enterprise skills, soft skills, personal attributes. So there are different ways of referring to these non-technical skills, and there are different definitions for all of these. However, despite these different terms, there are overlapping elements among the definitions for the different terms. They're all referring to what learners, employees, citizens require in order for them to be successful in society and in industry. Competencies, for example, is a term that refers to the specifications of those skills, knowledge, and attributes required to achieve performance standards for specific occupations. And the term soft skills is most often used by the business community to relate to a series of interpersonal and intrapersonal qualities necessary for the individual. Now, the emphasis on these skills in the past few years has been quite considerable. And if we look at some of the leading bodies that research what industry requires from its current and future employees, we come across different ways of organizing these skills, different ways of ranking them, and determining which ones are the most important. So, for example, a report by Deloitte emphasizes that jobs requiring soft skills and the development of soft skills in order for people to actually do these jobs, these will constitute 63% of all employment in the future. Traditionally, the way education and industry worked was to emphasize technical skills. The jobs of the present day and of the future will be jobs that underscore the value of soft skill development. And according to McKinsey, another leading organization when it comes to research in the corporate world, these kinds of skills will not just focus on the emotional competencies of employees, but they will also value advanced cognitive abilities. And the argument I will be making in this talk today is that we, as English language teachers, we are very well positioned to enable our learners to develop these kinds of skills. But only if we stop seeing our role as being that of focusing on technical abilities, on the skills that they require to become better communicators in English. If we start seeing as our role as being broader than that. And in a way, when we are enabling our learners to develop proficiency in English, we're also providing them or equipping them with the skills that they require to be more successful in their personal and professional domains. Now, why is all of this important? You might have come across the term VUCA, which refers to volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Many researchers and writers talk about us living in a VUCA world. Currently, the world is still going through a global pandemic, a pandemic that has caused millions of people their work, has forced others to change their occupation, has forced our students in certain contexts to suddenly switch to new forms of learning, teachers to adapt their teaching to a new reality. So it is a world that is characterized by uncertainty and by ambiguity. And developing the skills to actually navigate such a world is very, very important, not only for our learners, but also for the occupations that those people will eventually have in the future. And as a term, it was first referred to in the 1980s, but nowadays we see how valuable it actually is. Even though challenging situations exist and will continue to exist, it doesn't mean that we should give up. And as we can see in this quote by Abidi and Joshi, ultimately it is all about developing learning capabilities that enable us to confront such challenging situations and to respond to them in an appropriate manner. In fact, if you look at a report published by the World Economic Forum, the Future of Jobs report, which is a report issued almost every year, perhaps not every year, but every few years, the World Economic Forum issues a report that looks at the kinds of occupations that are highly important for industry, but also at the skills that people will require in order to do certain jobs. One of the skills mentioned in this particular report is active learning and learning strategies. It is considered the second most important skill for 2025. And in a VUCA world, we all need to adopt the kind of disposition that enables us to be lifelong learners, to adapt to new realities and be able to deal with them by having the necessary ability to learn new skills if so required. What I'm going to try and do in the rest of today's talk is to distill 5 important competencies that I think students can be enabled to develop in order for them to be more successful in employment, but also in the personal domains of their life. And I've tried to show how these 5 competencies can work with one another, can enable us to ultimately project a better image of what we can do and enable us to deal with the challenges and the uncertainty and volatility of the present, but also of the future. The first one of these elements that I'd like to start with is leadership. And according to Deloitte, once again, 42% of businesses require leadership skill development. They talk about the value of enabling employees to have democratic leadership skills. Leadership skills can encompass a wide variety of leadership styles, but having the ability to engage in democratic leadership seems to be particularly important. Despite the existence of so many leadership styles, democratic leadership, in a way, sits in the middle of the continuum of leadership styles. And democratic leadership, is how people can participate in organizations, in social settings, in such a way that everyone is allowed to have a say. Everyone is allowed to voice their views, their ideas. And it's not about an inspirational leader, one individual who leads an organization and everyone else follows, as you would get, for example, in transformational leadership. Democratic leadership is about what we do in democratic societies, where we all have the opportunity of voicing our opinion. So how do we actually go about this? And why should we do so? Well, first and foremost, let's start with the why. Democratic leadership is considered valuable in the academic literature because it promotes communication and team leadership. It enables people to work with one another. And as you can appreciate, in many organizations, this is fundamental. If you are not a team player, you are not likely to be successful. So encouraging our students to see the value of teamwork, of enabling everyone in a group to have their say and to contribute ideas is vital. Vital not only for employment, but also for the active contribution, the active participation of everyone in a society. Democratic leadership is also about nurturing people's autonomy and development. So even if eventually one of our learners comes to occupy a top-tier position in an organization, if they have democratic leadership credentials, they are also keen on making sure that everyone else in the organization is able to develop as an individual, as a professional, and to have the autonomy necessary to make valid contributions. Democratic leadership is not about the one and only leader. It's about enabling everyone in an organization to contribute to the success of that organization. And finally, democratic leadership enables people to achieve their goals. So it is really about development. It is really about equipping everyone with the capacity of making their aspirations a reality. It is about inclusion, inclusivity, helping everyone to contribute to the success of an organization. It doesn't mean that democratic leadership hasn't been criticized. It has. It has been criticized for delaying the decision-making process, for example. It has been criticized for sometimes being one of the causes for a teen's indecisiveness. Yes, there are critical voices out there as well. But as we can appreciate, since we live in a democratic society, having a culture of democracy in organizations, professional organizations, is also very important. The Harvard academic Francesca Gino talks about how we can foster democratic leadership, but what does it mean to have a democratic classroom? Here we have a quote by one specific company, and it mentions how students can be empowered in their learning in a democratic classroom. Students feel that when they participate in a democratic classroom, they are contributing to the decision-making process. There is also increased engagement, and the outcomes for the learners are far better because everyone feels as if they play an important role in that classroom. I've mentioned Francesca Gino, and in a recent book that she published, she talks about how we can develop the leadership capacities of every individual if we encourage a culture of constructive dissent. We make sure that in the classroom, we don't expect everyone to agree with us. Actually, we allow students to disagree with us and to disagree with one another. We give students a choice. We don't merely expect them to do what we tell them to do. So we lead from the trenches by being role models of democratic leaders. We invite our students' input in class decisions. We avoid making it all about what we see as being the best way of doing things. We respect our learners' ability to come up with ideas and to offer suggestions for how things should be done. So we encourage a culture in the classroom that is truly democratic. And in that way, we are hoping to develop the democratic leadership credentials of our learners. The last point that I'd like to make in relation to this is that all of this is valuable because the classroom itself can be a safe place where diversity is embraced, where we don't merely follow one dominant voice. And this, as you can appreciate, is highly valuable in society when it comes to fighting voices, views that might try to stifle dissent, that might try to undermine values of diversity, values of multiculturalism, for example. Again, we're seeing a lot of this in many parts of the world, including in Europe and in the United States, where the far right sometimes tries to go against these values that underscore the importance of having diverse views in a society. The next competence that I'd like to talk about is analytical and critical thinking. In the book that I referred to earlier at the beginning of my session, English for 21st Century Skills, in it, Penny Eyre talks about how critical thinking is perhaps one of the most important global skills of all. It is a competence that is really necessary in the kind of world we are currently living in. A world where we are inundated with information society. And in fact, when the World Economic Forum, in the report I mentioned earlier, when it surveyed companies from all over the world about the skills that they deem to be most important for future jobs, analytical and critical thinking skills placed first and fourth places respectively. Both of these skills entail using logic in order to process information and to solve problems. And we can appreciate that when our learners have such skills, have the ability to analyze information, to ask questions about the veracity of that information, to engage in problem solving, when they are able to critically engage with sources of information and to determine whether they are truthful or not, then this makes them not only better students, better learners, and better individuals when it comes to engaging with academic information, but it also makes them better at their jobs. And it is fundamental for anyone, for any citizen in the digital age, that they are able to do this. How can we encourage the development of analytical and critical thinking? Well, we can do so by trying to make sure that in the activities that we do in the classroom, we enable our learners to examine different perspectives. We provide them with the opportunity of looking at different points of view, of not only going with the dominant point of view, but trying to see the merits of different perspectives on the same issue, and determining whether a particular perspective is merely based on opinion or belief, or whether it is based on evidence. And I'll be talking about evidence a bit later. We can also encourage our learners to establish connections between seemingly different concepts, to bridge different ideas together and try to creatively see how those ideas can be connected with one another. Being able to actually adopt different perspectives is important, because sometimes, especially if learners are working in a group, they can come up with solutions to problems that are outside of the box. So they come up with new angles to long existent problems in a new manner, in a creative way. And collaboration is fundamental for this, because collaboration is not only important for group work and pair work activities in the English language classroom. Collaboration is most often crucial for the world of industry. So when our learners eventually start doing the job that they want to do, they will most often be encouraged to collaborate with others, whether it is in the same room or whether it is collaborating with people on the other side of the globe. Collaboration, in fact, has been one of the key pillars of many global skills frameworks, like the 4 Cs. And the final point is about making sure that our learners are able to question assumptions. Critical thinking enables you to go beyond the surface, to really question the assumptions that you might have about the world, to question your own beliefs, your own attitudes, your own judgment, the way you do things as an individual, and the way things are done in your own context. And in that way, you can come up with those new perspectives, those new angles that are so vital in order for us to be innovative. And obviously, innovation is a very important quality of any organization that wants to stay at the forefront of success. And questioning is also a very important competence in itself. The ability to be inquisitive not only in the sense of fostering your curiosity and developing the ability to constantly ask questions in order to learn, but also developing the ability to ask the right kind of questions. And this is of pivotal importance for those who see themselves as lifelong learners. It is also crucial for those not wanting to become, to use a term coined in the past few years, sheeple. That is, people who are similar to sheep in their docility and willingness to believe everything that others tell them. Yes, having the right kind of mindset that makes you ask questions about everything is a very powerful force in democratic society. And we can obviously realize how dangerous it is in societies that don't want to cultivate a democratic kind of culture. So enabling our learners to question everything and everyone, including ourselves as teachers, is very important. And in his book, Warren Berger, a book entitled A More Beautiful Question, he talks about the value of questions. And he gives many examples in his book on how it is important to encourage young people to adopt this kind of questioning mindset. Questions, yes, can sometimes be awkward. They can sometimes make us feel uncomfortable, but they are highly important, as we can see with this New York Times cover. The emperor has no clothes. If no one dares to question why, if no one dares to point that out, then the emperor will just keep rolling over everyone else. So how can we establish a culture of questioning in the classroom? Well, we can do this by making sure that in the kinds of activities that we do, especially if we're doing speaking activities in the classroom, reading activities, we are encouraging our students to use these everyday questions, questions that enable them to look at different perspectives, to determine what are the different perspectives, the different angles on an issue, to actually find out what facts support the different sides, not merely to go along with what the political leaders in the society are saying, with what the teachers are saying, with what their parents might be saying, but to try and find the evidence that is the foundation for a specific perspective. And then, once they are able to make up their minds about which side they identify with, they need to be able to make convincing arguments about why it is that they have certain views. One of the things that I discourage my own students from doing is merely to say, this is my opinion, you have to respect it. I encourage my students to disrespect opinions, not to respect all opinions. Not all opinions are equally valid, are equally important. So this idea that just because this is my opinion, you should respect it, is not a very helpful one for people in the kind of society that we want to live in. We want to be able to disagree with opinions and to identify flaws in opinions, opinions that can lead us down very dangerous paths, as we saw in history. Other activities might include merely passing around objects or texts or images and encouraging students to come up, to brainstorm questions about what they're seeing, what they're reading, what they're holding in their hands. Putting students in pairs. One person is the person holding an object, holding an image, and asking questions about it. The other person is encouraged to actually answer those questions. And another activity suggested by Moodzi involves enabling learners to try to see an issue, an idea, a situation from other people's eyes, from other people's perspectives. This might involve, for example, a photo from history, a very important photo showing a particular situation. And rather than focusing on the people at the center of that photo, we look at the perspective of those in the background. How might they be seeing that same event? So it's about enabling people to question reality itself, to question reality as sometimes depicted in the media, as sometimes portrayed by politicians, making them go beyond the surface and question everything if need be. And obviously, in order for us to be able to do this, we need to rely on reliable sources of information. And this is where factfulness comes in. Those of you who might have studied education, they know that in education, for many, many decades, we moved away from the model that insisted that teaching is about teaching facts. And that is correct. It shouldn't be about teaching facts. It shouldn't be about encouraging learners to fill their brains with loads and loads of sometimes not entirely useful facts. That's well and good. However, factfulness is not about teaching people to know more and more facts. It's not about making people, our learners, encyclopedias. It is about developing the capacity to look for facts when those facts are necessary to support a particular perspective, to support an opinion that you might have, to justify a belief that you might have. So factfulness, as described by the statistician and global health specialist Hans Rosling in his book, is about maintaining a fact-based approach to work, to life, to one's perspectives on things. It is about knowing how to locate information, reliable information, and how to use it in order to justify the opinions and the views that you might have on a specific issue. It is about ultimately adopting an informed approach to whatever we are engaged in. It is not about relying blindly on the attitudes and beliefs that we might have inherited from parents, society, the media, from whichever sources we might have gathered those particular beliefs, attitudes, and practices. It's about reliable evidence. And this is not only valuable for our learners, it is also valuable for us as teachers. In fact, for many years, we've been hearing about evidence-based practices. So practices that we don't merely engage in as professionals just because we might have been taught about them, just because we might have copied them from our own teachers, but because they work, because the science tells us they work. So for Hans Rosling, a fact-based worldview allows us to be successful in the personal and professional domain because it helps us to find our way. Now, the metaphor he uses here of the accurate GPS is perhaps not the best metaphor of all for those of you who might have used the GPS and got lost because the GPS took you off course. But having a tool that allows you to navigate the world in a more efficient manner is better than having no tool whatsoever. Having the evidence and perhaps enabling you to be more successful and more efficient in what you do because of that evidence is better than merely making your way blindly in the world just because you have certain beliefs, certain values, certain perspectives that you've never questioned. How can we encourage our learners to look for evidence? Well, the search for evidence needs to start from us enabling them to locate reliable sources, enabling them to see what's truthful, what's factual, and what's fake. And we all know we are inundated with fake news, with fake information. Some people make millions of dollars out of fake news. Some people win elections because of fake news. Evidence and the ability to rely on evidence, to locate evidence and to use evidence is also helpful in enabling us to question tradition. Traditions are good in certain cases, But if we merely keep replicating what has been done in the past, what has been done by our predecessors, then we are never going to be able to be innovative. And hence, questioning tradition and whether those traditions are still valuable for what we do in this organization now in 2021 is perhaps a better way of doing things. And it is also valuable because we are able to challenge our own assumptions. And if students learn how to go beyond their assumptions and to realize how powerful those assumptions are in guiding the path through life, they realize that assumptions can sometimes make them act in ways which are not fully appropriate, which might lack solidarity. I saw this, for example, when I used to do activities with my students aimed at enabling them to see things from the perspective of migrants coming to Malta. And in that way, challenging their own beliefs about migration and helping them to demonstrate solidarity with others. So this is how we can help our learners to adopt an evidence-based kind of approach to life, to what they'll be doing as employees. The last competence that I'd like to talk about is adaptability. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, given that we live in a VUCA world, given that it is highly likely that the future will continue being uncertain, ambiguous, and volatile, we need to ultimately, as teachers, as individuals, but also for our learners' sake, to underscore the value of adaptability. In some research conducted at the University of Southern California a few years ago, they looked at what employers in major corporations value in their employees. And they identified a number of soft skills. Adaptability was one of the most important skills of all, because adaptability allows you to change yourself, your emotions, your behavior, your attitudes, if need be, if your context changes. And a classic example of this, obviously, is what has happened in the past 18 months or so, where we ourselves as teachers have had to rely on our ability to be adaptable. Our learners were also forced to do this. In a way, many people all over the world in different occupations, working for different organizations, have had to find the ability to be adaptable. And those who didn't adapt suffered massively. Adaptability for our learners could very well be studying in order to do one particular job, but then facing a situation where the job is no longer valuable for society, that job becoming redundant. And we hear about how machines, artificial intelligence, can replace certain jobs. If we look at history, this has happened already. There were jobs in the past that people trained for, and those jobs disappeared, sometimes overnight. It might also happen to us and to our learners. So adaptability is crucial. And the more reality becomes complex, the more valuable adaptability is. For Ernest Wilson, adaptability is ultimately about a disposition. The willingness to adjust your thinking, what you think about something, how you think about something, your approach to a situation. And that situation might be completely unpredictable. It might be unexpected. And if you face such a situation, if you face certain challenges in the future, you're able to adapt because you have this disposition within you. How can we foster our students' adaptability? According to a recent study conducted by Martin and his colleagues, they discovered that the best way of doing so is to help our learners to adjust their behaviors, their attitudes, and their emotions. I won't go into what the study consisted of because of time limitations, but what Martin et al. Looked at was how students were encouraged to adapt to remote learning, given the new situation that people found themselves in because of the global pandemic. And they discovered that we can help students to adjust their behaviors, attitudes, and emotions by showing them how they can find new sources of information and support, by encouraging them to think of new situations, for example, learning remotely, in a positive manner, and by helping them to minimize negative emotions or shift the focus to positive feelings when doing unfamiliar activities. So in a way, it's about helping people to adapt through the changes that they make to their behavior, to their attitudes, and to their emotions, becoming more positive about the unexpected, the challenging situations that they find themselves in. And in that way, starting to realize that any challenging situation could actually be an opportunity in disguise. So those are the 5 competences that I wanted to go over with you today. 5 competences that are valuable because they do allow us to be more successful in what we do in our daily lives, but also in our careers. And they are 5 competences that are valuable for our learners for exactly the same reasons, and perhaps even more valuable for them as the world keeps changing in the future and keeps becoming even more complex. And the last point that I'd like to conclude with is, why should it be us as English language teachers that do this? Why shouldn't there be a specialized teacher who does this? Well, as English language teachers, we have the privilege of teaching communication, which is another important soft skill, another important competence. And when we teach a language like English, a global language like English, we are not merely enabling people to develop proficiency in certain skills and systems. We are also encouraging them to develop an appreciation of how communication can be used to foster a wide variety of different competences. In fact, Sarah Mercer, a friend and a colleague, talks about how we as teachers, as English language teachers in particular, through what we do in the classroom and through our own convictions as professionals, we are best placed to enable learners to develop such global skills. In a way, our duty towards our learners is not merely to make them more proficient in the language, but to educate them more holistically. And nowadays, doing so entails focusing on certain competences that they require to be more successful in the world of work, but also in the personal domain. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there's time, I would be happy to take questions.
Before we do, I would like to encourage everyone to actually unmute their microphones. And before anything else, give Professor Xerri a round of applause for what was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask Rhea or Annika if you could just confirm that, because I don't think the next presentation starts up for another 15 minutes. With Professor Xerri's good grace, perhaps we could go another extra 5 minutes if there are any questions coming from the audience. Would that be okay? We went an extra 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Xerri, would you mind if there were some questions in the audience hanging around a bit?
Yeah.
Okay,
Definitely.
fantastic. If you have any questions, pass them along in chat or use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window to indicate that you would like to open up your mic and ask a question. If no one else does, I have a couple of questions I would like to ask, take advantage of my position here. Professor Xerri, that was really fascinating. And one of the first things that I thought of when you started speaking about going into the future and what soft skills would mean is because, like you, I'm still very much wrapped up with what I do in the classroom. And what I'm seeing now is as an effect immediately, presently, and what will become even bigger in the future is the effect of, as you were mentioning, AI and its burgeoning ability to take straight conversation and to transcribe it, to repronounce it, to translate it. And now we have issues with students having great access to machine translation through DeepL and through Google Translate. And then as well too, with the, again, the same things that Google brings out, taking an app and pointing it at a piece of text and then having it translated for them right away. How, I mean, you put out a really great framework about, be adaptable, be a leader, show these kids that there are alternatives to just being mindless sheeple, as you would say. But how specifically do you see machine translation affecting the classroom now, and how do you deal with it?
Well, I see it as an opportunity. It shouldn't just be a threat. It shouldn't be perceived as a threat. And one of the worst things we could do is to see it as a threat to what we do in the classroom. And if we see it in that way, we're doing so because we feel that this is challenging the norm, challenging what has been happening in education, in language education in particular, for many, many decades. So seeing it as an opportunity for us to actually be more innovative in our practices, in the way we approach language teaching and learning, can enable us to use it as another tool for us to maximize language learning opportunities. It is not currently perfect, but still it will become more and more effective. And if we can adapt by appreciating the value of such technology and how that technology can complement what's happening in the language classroom, in the language learning context, then yes, we are much more likely to enable our learners to achieve their own goals with respect to language learning. Some people talk about how artificial intelligence, machine learning, can make our own job redundant. And there was a plenary talk a few years ago by Sugata Mitra at the IATEFL conference. And despite the fact that he received a round of applause at the end of that plenary, then he received a lot of abuse afterwards because he felt that he was saying that teachers will become redundant. Language teachers will no longer be important. But what if that were to happen? I'm not saying that it will happen. Other people like Michiko Kako talk about how this won't happen because of what we do as language teachers, the very nature of what we do. But if it were to happen, then adaptability would be very important for us as professionals, and adapting ourselves to new realities and perhaps occupying a new role in society. That might be necessary for all we know. It's very difficult to look into the future and see whether this will be a reality that we will face in 10 years, 20 years' time. But we need to stress the value of adaptability, not only for our learners, but even for us, if we have 20 more years of work ahead of us. One of the questions in the chat box was, which do you think is the most difficult skill to teach? And the reason why I left adaptability at the very end is because I think this is one of the hardest skills to teach. You're not just teaching something that people can do, but you're trying to teach a disposition, adopting a particular disposition. And it is also a very uncomfortable thing to do. If you've been trained to be a teacher, how can you suddenly start learning new things in order to do something else in life, if need be. And that might be a reality for many of our students as things keep changing rapidly, and as we live in societies where artificial intelligence will play an even more fundamental role.
There was another question that came from Rhea. What organizations do you know that you feel truly characterize democratic leadership? I think may aim to, but there can be a gap between theory and practice.
Yes, and that's a very valid question. It is an aspiration for many organizations to be democratic, but most often when we look at cases of big organizations, we sometimes fail to see democratic leadership being practiced by the people within that organization. There are examples of schools that have tried to actually be more democratic. So there are examples of school principals who, despite their position of authority in the school, have really encouraged the staff within the school to be active contributors to school policy and to shaping the practices of that particular school. Most often, when we look at democratic leadership as something successful, as happening successful, it is much more likely for it to be successful in a small organization, like, for example, a school or a small company, than in a large conglomerate, in a large corporation. It is far more difficult to have democratic leadership in these large organizations than it is in smaller organizations and institutions.
I think we're pretty much at time now. Just want to make sure that the next presentation has enough time to set up. And I want to provide Professor Xerri another round of applause if everybody would cooperate.
Thanks so much.